Okay, welcome everyone. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm going to be recording this, so just be aware that if you have your videos on, it may be showing up on YouTube. You can shut your videos off by clicking on the little camera icon for stop video if you aren't comfortable with that. My name is Cecilia Norris, and on behalf of Marsha Murphy and the AIM/MHI Ministries, we are excited to welcome you to this lecture by Dr. Jamie Elizalde. And I'm just going to start with a few Zoom meeting housekeeping items. First of all, if you could mute yourselves, then you won't show up in the speaker view. At the end, when we have questions, you can unmute to ask a question. Also, if you want to ask a question in the chat, we will be reviewing those. I'll be reviewing those while Dr. Elizalde is giving her talk, and then at the end, to see if we see when the most appropriate time to ask the questions are. If you want to get the best view of the meeting, you want to choose the speaker view instead of gallery view on Zoom. So on PCs, I think it's in the upper right corner. You'll have an option for speaker view or gallery view. And then I think that's all the housekeeping items that I have. So again, we're very excited to share this event with you. It is sponsored by the AIM/MHI Ministries of St. Andrew Presbyterian Church here in Iowa City. AIM stands for Access and Inclusive Mission, was founded in Sacramento, California by a Presbyterian church minister, the Reverend Dr. Timothy H. Little. Reverend Little is legally blind and is a former chaplain supervisor of Davis Medical Center in California and now retired. He and Marsha Murphy began corresponding in summer 2013, and with his guidance, Marsha established the AIM ministry at St. Andrew, which was also the first in the Midwest. The focus of AIM is to increase disability awareness and inclusion for those with physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual challenges, encouraging our religious and civic communities to be welcoming places for all. In recent years, the AIM Committee has discovered that partnering with a sister ministry at St. Andrew, MHI, Mental Health Initiatives, founded in 2006 at St. Andrew, also by Marsha, has broadened the AIM ministry's scope of influence. In many respects, AIM and MHI meld together with their joint focus on support for the disabled and health and wellness in body, mind, and spirit, including social inclusion within the religious community. Social support for those with physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual challenges is the bedrock in a warm and welcoming congregation. These joint ministries promote advocacy for physically and mentally disabled persons through educational events such as workshops, presentations like this, and literature, as well as for the purchase of clothing for those needing assistance at the UIHC psychiatric units in Iowa City. Our event today features Dr. Jamie Elizalde. Dr. Elizalde is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry and psychology at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics and a nationally certified school psychologist. She completed her PhD in school psychology at Illinois State University and her pre- and postdoctoral training in behavioral pediatrics at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Prior to working in clinical settings, Dr. Elizalde worked as a school psychologist in the California public schools for nearly a decade, including 1 year as coordinator of special education. At UIHC, Dr. Elizalde provides assessment and therapy interventions for children with a range of childhood disorders, with specialties in anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Tourette syndrome. So I'm very excited now to turn it over to Dr. Jamie Elizalde.
Good morning, everybody. I am so happy to be here and excited to see so many people early on a Saturday morning. I find it very heartening. One of the things that you'll learn as we move through the presentation is that the answer to peer victimization and bullying is actually a group effort. It involves the community. It involves more than just the individuals that we see that are participating or being victimized. And so this is a really important topic, and I'm really glad to see you all. I want to make sure everybody can see my slides. If you're having difficulties, if you could put something in the chat, and I'll have Cecilia or Marcia just open their mic and tell me. So as long as everybody's doing okay on that end, I'll pause for just a moment. While I'm pausing, I want to thank Cecilia and Marcia for reaching out to me to do this presentation. I think this is a great opportunity to reach out to the larger community beyond our hospital setting. Everything look okay from your end, Cecilia and Marcia? Yeah, okay, great. So the topic for this morning is bullying, and I want to give you kind of a background about how you can recognize it, what it all means, some of the statistics, and then how to support people who are experiencing bullying. So the agenda kind of, oops, let me forward my slide here, is going to be the what, who, when, where, why, and how of bullying. So I'm going to kind of move through these and give you a little bit of the WH questions. So what is bullying? There are multiple definitions of bullying. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention describes it as unwanted aggressive behavior by another youth or group of youths who are not siblings, not dating partners. And this involves observed or perceived power imbalance that is repeated multiple times or is highly likely to be repeated. It can inflict harm and distress on the targeted youth, and this can include physical, psychological, social, or educational harm. And a young person can be a perpetrator, meaning they are the person doing the bullying, a victim, meaning they're targeted by somebody who is bullying, or both, which is also known as a bully victim. So just to break that down a little bit more, bullying is unwanted, it's repeated or likely to be repeated, it's aggressive, and aggressive can be either verbal or physical or relational. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. And there's an imbalance of power. That can either be a real imbalance of power or a perceived imbalance of power, meaning the person being targeted feels as though they are in a position of less power than the person who is doing the bullying. Bullying hurts, harms, or humiliates another person physically or emotionally. A couple of side notes I wanted to bring up, and these are things that I've actually learned in the process of putting together the presentation for today. And I'm going to work really hard to start to use this new language and terminology. Some of the slides that I have actually reference materials that are a little bit older, so they use the older terminology, if you will. But I think these are really powerful points and worth working on for all of us. So instead of calling somebody a victim of bullying, we want to start to use the word target. A victim implies that they are powerless and they don't have any options in a situation, where a target sort of recognizes that they are being targeted by somebody. So it's just a way of thinking differently about what happens to somebody when they are bullied. They're being targeted. And similarly, we want to talk about the person who bullied instead of calling somebody a bully. When we call somebody a bully, it doesn't give them room to change or to become somebody different. We've labeled them as well. So we really want to think about changing the words around. You'll also start to hear bullying being referred to as peer victimization. So that may be referenced more when you look through materials or if you hear things in the media. So that's just a switch in terminology as well. So let's talk a little bit about what we know about bullying. I'm going to start with some myths of bullying. So there are a lot of myths out there, and I think the wonderful thing is some of these are starting to become well-known myths. So bullying is not isolated an individual. That is a myth, and we'll talk more about the wide-reaching ramifications and community that is involved with bullying. Bullying does not occur just between a bully and a victim. There are many other people involved. There's a myth that anti-bullying policies are ineffective. We know, in fact, that policies in schools and communities can impact the outcomes for bullying. Bullying is a normal part of growing up. That is also a myth. Unfortunately, enough people experience bullying while growing up that we think it's normal. Just because it happens to a lot of people does not make it okay or mean that it has to be normal or typical. The next myth is it's impossible to stop bullying. In fact, there are lots of things we can do, and we're going to talk about those toward the end of the presentation. Bullying prevention and intervention are complicated and expensive. I'm hoping to give you some strategies today that are neither of those. And physical bullying is more damaging than relational or verbal bullying. That is also not true. So bullying can take many different forms, and some of these we've already started to refer to. Physical bullying, and physical bullying can involve hitting, kicking, punching, spitting, tripping or pushing, breaking somebody's things, or making rude or mean hand gestures at people. Those are all forms of physical bullying. And what you'll see in parentheses are some statistics on the different rates of bullying that were reported in a couple of surveys, one in 2010, and then the one with the asterisk was updated in 2018. Electronic or cyberbullying, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that involves social media and emails and texting. Social relational bullying. This is hurting someone's reputation or their relationships, and it usually happens by leaving somebody out on purpose, so excluding people, telling people not to be friends with somebody in particular, spreading rumors about somebody, embarrassing somebody in public, putting things on social media about that can kind of cross the line between electronic cyberbullying and social relational. And then verbal bullying, so that's teasing, name calling, inappropriate sexual comments, taunting or threatening to cause harm. So what do we know about bullying? We know that the frequency of bullying has not necessarily increased over time. I think that there is definitely a perception of that. Unfortunately, it's always been there. In fact, what's happened is that there's been an increase in the studies on bullying, a huge increase, which is a wonderful thing because that's how we're learning more about it and how we can intervene. The increase in the research has come about for a few reasons, and one of the biggest ones starting back in the 90s was with the high-profile school shootings. We know that many of the shooters in those school shootings were the chronic victims of bullying. Now, I want to be careful to remind you that does not mean that everybody who is bullied becomes a school shooter, right? That's a very small population, and that's something our brains tend to go to. Everybody does this, but in fact, many of the school shooters have been victims of bullying. That doesn't mean that everybody who's bullied will become a school shooter. I'm going to take a little side note here to talk about harassment because that oftentimes is accompanied by bullying or a part of bullying. And so harassment is bullying when it's based upon a student's race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, or religion. And when it's harassment, it's covered by different federal and even state regulations. So there's protections for people under the Americans with Disabilities Act, human rights laws against discrimination, and then again, there may be some more specific state or local laws or codes that cover those things. And for schools, the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Justice require those schools that get federal funds to address behavior under federal law specific to harassment. So that's a sort of a protected class of people who may be bullied. And I think that's really important to point out because I'm not sure people are always aware that that is a form of bullying, but there's a different protection for people who meet those criteria. And you'll see throughout my presentation, I have some references. On this one at the bottom, the last bullet point, you see pacer.org. I have found some amazing websites that are reliable and have good information and handouts and resources and videos on these topics. And so at the end of the presentation, I will send Cecilia and Marcia a copy of those links so that you can look them up. So what we know about bullying, just a disclaimer, there are unfortunately some barriers in the research, and that is because one, it's actually relatively new research, even though we know it's been around for a while. As I indicated a few slides ago, the research has just really picked up speed in the last couple of decades. Bullying is an underground behavior, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, right? So it's not something that we do out in public. People who engage in bullying tend to watch their surroundings and do it in a way that's more secret or covert. And unfortunately, people who are bullied don't often go out and share that information for multiple reasons. It can be humiliating. They're afraid of retribution, so somebody coming after them after they talk about it to somebody else. And so there's lots of reasons that we don't have really sound research. So what you'll see in the numbers and the statistics that I talk about is wide ranges. The definition of bullying is also not consistent across studies, and so that's another reason for some of the differences in the numbers that you're going to see. So that being said, here's some of the information on the rates of bullying that we see. 10 to 33% of people have reported being the targets of bullying. 5 to 13% have admitted to bullying other people. Females have reported being the victims of bullying and targeted more than males. There's been a rise in online harassment, so cyberbullying. Males tend to be more involved in physical bullying. And there's some research that identifies females as more involved in the relational bullying. So some of those excluding people, spreading rumors, although that's not been clearly established. And this is based on, the numbers here are based upon a study that looked at the last 4 decades, if you see on the bottom right, the reference here, of research on bullying. So this is sort of a compilation of a lot of different studies and data over time. A little bit more recent data, about 20% of students ages 12 to 18 experience bullying nationwide. 19% of students in grade 9 to 12 reported being bullied on school property over the 12 months prior to this survey. And students aged 12 to 18 who reported that they had been bullied said that they thought those who bullied them had the ability to influence others' perceptions of them, had more social influence than they did, were physically stronger or larger than they were, or had more money. So giving you kind of a picture of what that bullying might look like and the experiences of teens more recently. This data is from 2019, 2017, and you'll see a couple of references down on the right again. StopBullying.gov is another really wonderful site that has lots of references on it. Unfortunately, we know that there's a lot of bullying against people who are from different sexual backgrounds, different gender and sexual orientations. So among those who identify themselves as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, they experience much more verbal, physical harassment, and they're 3 times as likely to miss class as other victims of bullying. There's not as much research, surprisingly, on those with developmental disabilities and bullying. However, from the studies that have been done, they appear to be 2 to 3 times more likely to be bullied than their non-disabled peers. That's a very large number. I'm giving you all a little bit of time to let the numbers sink in.
This may be a good time to answer the question in the chat.
Absolutely.
Yes. So are there protections for those who are doing the bullying due to diagnosed mental or cognitive illnesses? This was my experience with a coworker at UAHC, and going through all the official conflict management, I was told there was nothing they could do.
That is a great question, and because I'm not an attorney, I can't say specifically. I do think if you're not sure, that it would be within your rights to reach out to an attorney or advocate to find out what your rights are. I don't have that much knowledge on that. It's a great question. And what we'll talk about a little later on is that people can both be the person who does bullying and also the target of bullying, and that happens to be a larger category of people than we might think. I'm sorry I don't have a more explicit answer to that question. So again, a little bit more on cyberbullying and understanding that the numbers vary widely because it's reported differently and it's more covert. But among middle and high school age students, the people who do the bullying has ranged between 1 and 41%. The people who have been targeted is between 3 and 72%. Those are very wide ranges, I acknowledge. And then there's overlapping people who report experiencing and doing both, and that's between 2 and 16%. On the bottom again, and this is specifically to Iowa, there's a large survey that goes out called the High School Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And this data is collected and reported from 2019. And on the left column, you'll see people who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual and the rates of bullying that they experience online. I have it broken down by the total number and then underneath by gender. And on the right side compared to people who identify as heterosexual. And you'll notice there's a very large difference there. And this is in our state. So different types of bullying, again, being reported in 2017. 20% report being bullied at school, and this data is broken down by dark green is male, and the lighter green on the bottom is female. Being the subject of rumors, overall 13% more females in this study reported being the subject of rumors as a form of being bullied. Being made fun of, called names, or insulted at 13%. Again, females slightly higher than males. The physical aggression, pushed, shoved, tripped, or spit on, 5% overall. Excluded on purpose from activities, 5%. Threatened with harm, 4%. Tried to do things that they did not want to, about 2%. And then destroyed their property on purpose, 1.5%. So just again, to give you an idea of what is happening out there, what it looks like. We're gonna move on to the who's involved in bullying section next, but before I leave this section, are there any other questions that people have that apply to this data or the information I've discussed so far? And I can't see my chat, so I'll have to rely on Marcia and Cecilia for that. But I want to just pause for a minute in case people do have any questions.
No questions so far.
Okay, that gave me a chance to take some water too. We'll go on to the who. So who are the people that bully? That's the first who that we're going to discuss. Now, I want to, again, you'll hear me caution several times that there is no single profile for bullies. There's not a lot of causal relationships in this literature either, right? So I'm not saying because somebody has this, they're going to do this. And I want to be really clear about that throughout. However, there are some common characteristics that have been found among people who engage in bullying behavior. These people can be easily frustrated or feeling impulsive, so acting before they think. So many of us may have urges to say or do things when we're feeling that frustration, but for people with poor impulse control, it might come out before they have a chance to rethink that situation or that thought. They can be highly aggressive toward peers and adults, both verbally and physically. They may have difficulties following rules, be more oppositional or argumentative, have difficulties with conduct in general, so breaking laws, not abiding by what we expect from our citizens at large. I have impulsive on there again. I must think it's really important. They have a more positive attitude toward violence. So they might just not see it as a really big negative and actually seek out that type of entertainment. They have a need to dominate others. They can have little empathy toward victims. So not feeling or being able to put themselves in the perspective of the person who has been bullied. They may have friends who engage in bullying. And again, not all highly aggressive youths are bullies. So I want to be really clear about that. Something else interesting to think about is that not all of the people who bully are unpopular and rejected. So for me, I'll be honest, the stereotype that comes to mind is somebody that is on the right column here, the socially marginalized group, people that don't have a lot of friends. We might think of them as loners. They may be more aggressive. They might be at risk when they're in school. They may have more, what you see there, externalizing and internalizing problems. That means acting out behaviors, and internalizing is more like depression, anxiety, those sorts of things. They might have negative self-views of themselves and other people. They may not have very good social skills or understanding of the social nuances. And it's more often males, and they're more likely to harass females. That's my view. When I think of bullying, this is immediately kind of what pops up in my mind. On the left side, you actually see a whole nother group. And when you stop to think about this, we probably, unfortunately, all have witnessed people who fall into the socially integrated category as well. These are people who engage in bullying behavior in a proactive way. So instead of reacting because of circumstances, they're actually going out and purposely engaging in bully behavior to have some sort of outcome. They actually have a social network. They're popular among their peers, and they have a lot of positive attributes. So they may have good social skills, they might be athletic, they might be highly attractive. They're more likely to engage in within-sex bullying, so male to male or female to female, and there's an even split among the gender. In some studies, when they've done research, these are people who other youth will report as being perceived as popular. And when they ask that same group of youth, who do you like, they actually are not popular. They're more intimidating, so people assume they must be popular. And I think that's a really interesting insight for people who are in high school, and really seeing those people and assuming they're popular. In fact, many people are intimidated by them and don't actually like them. So who is targeted? What are the risk factors for being bullied? People with low self-esteem, experiencing depression, who are feeling anxious or insecure. People who may be more sensitive. People who are more quiet or cautious. People who may be perceived as non-aggressive. They may be less popular or not have as many friends. And they're perceived as different from their peers. So it might be the way they dress, might be their weight, might be they wear glasses, it might be they're new to the school, it may be that they have a different sexual orientation or gender identity, or they just don't seem to get along as well with others, and maybe that's because of their own difficulties with social interactions. So they're viewed by others as sort of provoking situations or antagonizing their peers. So similar to the people who bully, because people have these characteristics does not mean they will be bullied. As I mentioned earlier, the role of being a bully or engaging in bully behavior or being targeted for bullying actually change. So what it says there is it's not fixed, meaning you're not always the person who engages in bullying behavior or gets targeted, and they're not just one or the other. So there's this kind of continuum, and people might move around within that. And so a bully victim, and again, this is from older terminology, I'm really working to change it, but this is how it's identified, are people who both bully or target others and are bullied themselves. These tend to be people who may be more hyperactive, more impulsive, have been rejected more by their peers, may have difficulties in school, may have harsh home environments, and they're more likely to engage in reactive aggression. And what that means is that when somebody comes toward them or does something that they perceive as hostile, it may not actually even be hostile, it's their perception, they're more likely to react in an aggressive verbal or physical manner. These are also students who unfortunately may have had more adverse childhood events themselves, so been more exposed to violence or crime, or some sort of trauma in their history. These are the youth that have the highest risk for suicide-related behavior of any of the other groups that we've talked about. There's another important group, I would say probably one of the most important, and that is the bystanders. That's the rest of the people who are onlookers. Most bullying does not happen in isolation. There's typically at least 2 to 4 people who are present. 7 to 21% of the time, there are people who will actively join in. 20% of the time, there are people who in fact encourage the bullying, and only intervening 17% of the time. So there's a large movement. If you look at any of the websites that I'll post for you, there's a large movement to engage bystanders, to get more involvement from the people in the community and in the school buildings to support the people when this behavior is occurring. And I think that's a really powerful tool. And I hope if that's one thing you all take away from today, it's that there is something that we can do when we see this happening. And unfortunately, as we get older, we tend to be more passive and engage and get involved and try to stop this on less frequently. So there's a lot of negative side effects from being bullied. There's increased feelings of depression, anxiety, sadness, and isolation. There's a decrease in self-esteem, which I don't have up there, but is unfortunately very much related. There's a decline in academic performance, so grades might go down, attendance, so avoiding school altogether, going late, leaving early. People who are bullied might experience increased suicidal ideation, may have more suicide attempts, or what we call non-suicidal self-injury. So that would be cutting behavior or doing something to hurt yourself on purpose. And as adults, those who recall childhood bullying are at an increased risk of suicide attempt. So there's some very serious and negative outcomes for being a target of bullying. And the last thing I have on there is a note. Again, this is one of my, it's not a causal relationship. There's a very complex relationship between suicide and bullying. In the media, we often hear about this direct correlation, but what we know is that there's often many underlying factors. So we want to be careful not to think that bullying is a cause or a reason for suicide. We also want to be really careful to help people recognize that there are other ways to manage and cope, and not kind of perpetuate the idea that it's a natural consequence, that this is something that is your only alternative. The bystanders are also impacted by bullying behavior. They feel guilt for not doing something. They may become fearful of the environment because it's hostile. They may feel helpless. They may feel like they should get involved. They may feel, again, fearful of the situation and not go to school or miss school or avoid situations. And there's also an increased risk of anxiety and depression for the people who are watching. So before I leave this section, I'm going to take a drink of water and pause again to see if there are any questions in this part. Or comments, if there's something surprising that jumped out at you and you want to share. If we were all in a room together, you would probably be whispering to each other or making faces, and we don't have that, so I feel like we don't have this sort of natural bond that develops. So feel free to put your comments out there when they strike you. Okay, we're going to jump into the when and where of bullying.
We'll just say that there was a comment that teen boys really struggle with this. I assume that's being bystanders and what to do.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree. I think it's a really difficult situation, especially when it feels like reputation is on the line, and if you are not confident in the adults around you to intervene in a way that doesn't expose you more. So there's some information about when bullying starts to happen. So elementary school, even kindergartners have reported being victims of bullying or targeted by bullying. And again, we talked about those victim bully roles, people who are both the targets of bullying and engage in bullying themselves. And we do know that the people who are more aggressive in elementary school are also likely to remain aggressive going into middle school and high school. Middle school is when bullying and being the target of bullying peaks. I've read some studies that highlight 7th grade as the year that it all goes down. So when you hear junior high students talking about this, it's a real thing. And in high school, we don't have as much information. It's not as researched as well. We do know that there's a greater association with harassment starting. So again, that's those protected populations. And where bullying occurs. I think this is a really important and thought-provoking way to think about it. So bullying happens in the classroom. Bullying happens in the hallway or stairwell of schools, in the bathroom or locker room, cafeteria, somewhere else in the school building, not specified, outside on the school grounds, on the school bus, or online by text. And there's another study I did not cite in here, but the data look very similar to this. It's a little bit older, the other study is. This is for students aged 12 to 18 in 2017. Now, I will note, I didn't focus on workplace bullying, but there's also workplace bullying and workplace harassment. So, you know, those are other things to think about. And some of the interventions we're going to talk about would apply to the workplace as well, although obviously this data doesn't capture that. So why does bullying happen? You know, there's lots of reasons out there, and I think we've talked about some just by identifying some of the risk factors for people who engage in bullying or who are targeted by bullies. But I want to propose to you this model by a researcher who's out of the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And she has done a lot of research into bullying, and this is her model. So on the left, what you see, and I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a circle, and these are all connected. So if you can imagine, this can go any direction, and it talks about individual factors. So those are things specific to the person. So some of those risk factors that I identified earlier, having maybe increased anxiety or depression or some other sort of disorder. And family factors, so what's happening at home and how that might impact somebody. The peer group, the people that you spend time with. The school factors, what is the school policy? What is the school spirit and culture regarding how we treat our fellow students and the other adults in the building? And then the community, what's happening in the community that might support or discourage bullying behavior. So all of these things are linked. So it's not just a person comes out and everything develops in a vacuum. All of these factors play into what happens for somebody to become either targeted or engage in bullying behavior. So I have Sally, age 11, and this is right out of Dr. Swearer's notes in a book that I have, and I think it really illustrates this principle. So let's imagine we have Sally. She's 11 years old, and her personality, people describe her as being impulsive. She's quick to get mad, especially when she's frustrated. That alone does not ensure that she's going to engage in bullying behavior. But now let's imagine that at home, she's bullied by her sister. Her family models poor anger management skills, so when they become frustrated, they act out on it, and that works for them. They get what they need out of a situation. When she goes to school, there's no explicit policy on bullying that's kind of forwarded by the administration or in her classroom. It's not discussed. When issues have come up, there doesn't appear to be any follow through. Students don't feel safe. And she sees other peers bullying, and she notices that they're popular. She notices that they seem to fit in. And so she's like, okay, this looks like a good path. If I do this, I'm going to have friends. When I'm feeling frustrated, this is how I know to act because that's what I see at home. It works when I do it with my sister. Nobody's getting in trouble for this at school. So you can see how this sort of develops. It's not something that happens in a vacuum. And again, that's why I'm so glad you're all here this morning, because these are things that we can all think about and work toward helping people who are on either side of the bullying equation. thoughts or questions at this point before I go on to the how you can help, how you can intervene?
There is a question. Adults bully others. I was going to mention this and ask what amount of research is done around this. My son was bullied by his kindergarten teacher and teacher's aide.
I have not seen a lot of research. Now, to be fair, I'm mostly looking at that in children and students. And I would assume if there was a lot out there on teachers and people in schools engaging in bullying with children, I would have seen it. I would say that that's probably going to fall under some other legal code as well. But I don't know the specifics. But yes, it does happen. I know there's some research. I just don't know it well enough to speak to it. If it's happening in a school setting, I would certainly encourage you, if you have not already, to approach administration. There are some other avenues that you can pursue as well through some of the links that I'll provide at the end. Particularly if it's a student who falls into one of those protected classes, then they may have protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act or under federal rights legislation for the Office of Civil Rights. So those are two options to explore if that's the case. Okay, how to watch for bullying. What things you might see from somebody who is a target of bullying. You might notice that they're missing personal items, things are torn, or things that are important to them are damaged. They may have unexplained bruises, cuts, or scratches. They may say like, you know, I'm gonna head to school this morning, but I'm gonna leave 30 minutes early and take the long route. So it doesn't necessarily fit what they would usually do. They may have lots of stomach aches, headaches, reasons to stay home from school. This is something I've seen in clinic with children who have been the targets of bullying. There may be changes in their eating and sleeping habits. Their grades may change. They just may seem unhappy about going to school. They might start showing difficult behavior when they didn't usually before. They may seem more defensive. They may have more irritability or mood shifts or sudden outbursts or engage in some of the suicidal or self-injurious behaviors that I mentioned earlier. Now, these can also be the signs of other things, but I would maintain if you know somebody who is demonstrating these signs, they probably need some support regardless of whether or not they're being bullied. So you don't necessarily need to jump to the conclusion this is bullying, but it's okay to see if they need help, to reach out and offer support. And cyberbullying, it's a world all its own, and it evolves. I think every 24 hours there's something new that you can do online, so it's really difficult to keep up. What I have cited here at the bottom is a wonderful resource, cyberbullying.org. The two people who put the site together are professors, one in criminal justice and I can't remember the other one, but they have this great website. It has lots of resources, and they have, well, I think I have a slide to cite it later, even a 2020 handout on cyberbullying. So it's like the most up-to-date you can get. But some things you might look for that somebody's being targeted online. They unexpectedly stop using their devices. For those of you who are familiar with children these days, if they decide they no longer want to do what they usually do online, might be a little suspicious. If they seem kind of nervous or jumpy when they're on their devices, so you enter the room and they kind of quick put it away, or they turn it over, or they set it down. If they're online and they seem to be more frustrated or cranky or irritable, or upset after they look at social media or when they are involved in gaming. And by the way, if there's a lot of, unfortunately, bullying behavior that goes on in online games as well. Or if they just seem more withdrawn than usual. And of course, the flip side of that is that people may be bullying others online. And I don't have to tell you, this happens among adults as well, unfortunately, and it seems to be gaining momentum. It's keyboard warriors. When you're at home and nobody can see you, it's just really easy to impulsively say and do things that possibly you wouldn't do face to face. So they may do some of the same things, quickly hide their device, switch screens. They're on their phone all times of day and night. They might be really upset if they can't use it, which is hard to distinguish from a child or adolescent who's really upset when they can't use their device anyway. They may not want to talk to you about what they're doing online, and they may have multiple accounts with different names, ones that aren't their own. Those are all some things to watch for. So I'm going to go back to this great model about how to fight back against bullying. So peers. Peers are present in at least 85% of bullying incidents. Again, those onlookers or bystanders. And so we know that just by having adults present and monitoring those groups where bullying behavior may occur can help to reduce it. So in a classroom, if the teacher notices small groups of students starting to congregate, or notices someone that may appear distressed or may have some of those risk factors, being physically closer can reduce the discussion and the discourse around it. So just being present, teaching peers how to say things and how to stand up for others. And again, I'm going to reference those websites. I wish I had like 5 hours with you all, because there's some great examples and videos of teens actually saying, here's what you can do, here's how you can get involved. And I think that can be one of the best things, is learning what to say. Because as somebody had mentioned earlier, and it sounds like for males, when you're the onlooker, how do you do that and save your reputation, or whatever it is that you're uncomfortable, what makes you uncomfortable reaching out? Sometimes it's just not knowing what to do or say. At home, family interventions, parents modeling how to manage frustration, how to manage their own difficulties and relationships with other people, and watching and monitoring devices, the games, social media. And so just generally increasing supervision, we know, is a great intervention for a lot of risky child and adolescent behaviors. In the community, having schools have agendas, have plans, discuss bullying, discuss efforts to reduce bullying, let it be known that it will not be tolerated, have community and school involvement jointly. A lot of the data I've shown you is related to schools specifically, but there's things that happen when kids leave school. And so getting the community and the schools to join together can be really critical. And youth are reluctant to report. They're more likely to report if they believe they're actually going to be taken seriously and that teachers are going to respond proactively. It's really important. So if everybody could just think of a time when you were having difficulties with somebody, maybe as an adult, maybe when you were in school, and when you think about what you want to do with that information and who you're going to approach. If you think that the person you're going to approach is going to call you out, expose you, embarrass you in the process, or not take you seriously, you're likely not to approach. And particularly for teenagers, junior high students, there's often a feeling that they're not going to be taken seriously. So it's up to adults and caregivers to really think about listening to what teens have to say. So we can fight back against bullying. Also, there are some research strategies that align pretty well with the circles that I just showed you, and that is improving the supervision of students, using school rules and behavior management techniques in the classroom and throughout the school to detect and address bullying, and having consequences for bullying. Have those be consistent, implemented on a regular basis. And that doesn't mean necessarily that everybody in the whole world needs to know what happened, right? There's a lot of privacy laws around students and individuals, and that's okay. But once students start to understand that it won't be tolerated, they won't do it as much, just because of those consequences. And promoting cooperation among different professionals and school staff and parents. So again, really listening to one another across those settings. So again, I'm not an attorney, but there is some really great information, and it comes from the stopbullying.gov website, and you can actually get into specifically what all the Iowa state laws and regulations are that cover bullying. Oh my gosh, there's so many, and I got overwhelmed looking at them, but if there's something particular that you're looking for, I think this would be a good place to start. A couple things I wanted to point out is, again, that harassment piece. And how that might impact anti-bullying laws. And then I think on the next slide I have I'll give you just another minute to look at this one if you want to.
There was also a question of what would
Oh,
a school agenda look like for anti-bullying? So I don't know more specifics.
So what a school agenda would look like, schools put together plans, and it can start with the superintendent, it can start with the administrator at the school, and having policies clearly posted as to what constitutes and defining bullying behavior and what might fall under the parameters of being a target of bullying. It would include clear expectations and rules posted in classrooms. It would be making it clear to students where to go if they're experiencing it, and also who to talk to if they're concerned for a friend. So making all of those things very accessible, and then instruction and in-services for the staff themselves to understand what that looks like and to understand what it is that they're looking for. And some of these things about where it might be happening and who may be involved, so that they have a better idea of what they're watching for. We know that the rate of reporting that students will say bullying is occurring is much higher than what teachers actually believe is happening. So there's a mismatch. If you ask teachers, they'll give a number that's much lower than what is actually occurring and what students are reporting. And sometimes just that knowledge alone can be compelling enough to help staff to understand they need to get more involved. The next slide is specific to cyberbullying. Importantly, I found this, it was on this last website, that there are no anti-bullying laws that cover off-campus conduct for cyberbullying, which can be really confusing and probably frustrating, because if somebody is at home and they get a text message when they go to school the next day, being at school may be really difficult, but there isn't a specific law that applies to that. And I don't know much more than that, but I just thought it was worth pointing out, because we know that that same behavior, even if it doesn't happen at school, can affect the way that people come to school. This is that handout I was telling you about, the PDF on cyberbullying. It was just put out. This is the group that does it. And they just have so many wonderful resources in an area, again, that I think is really difficult to keep up with. And this is here in Iowa City, in the Iowa City School District. They actually have a number that you can text to report. I don't have it up here, but there's also information and access for people who feel that they've been a victim of harassment or targeted for harassment, which is, again, bullying, but in one of those protected populations. And there are different legal parameters that apply to being harassed. So if you look on the Iowa City School website, if there's concerns for that, there's somebody you can reach directly. So this is a tool where you can text, and it's anonymous, and it lets people know that there's concern about bullying behavior or somebody that's being targeted. Here's what, oh, yeah.
There are a couple of other questions. You may be getting ready to answer them, but one is, what can onlookers do to intervene but also not hurt their reputations?
Mm-hmm.
And then I know bullying was occurring 70 years ago when I was a child. Are there studies comparing current bullying to what was happening in earlier generations?
Ooh, that's a great one. I don't know that for certain. The best comprehensive review I saw was the one that looked at 4 decades of research. And I don't know that it says much about that, but I can't say I was reading it with that eye. That's a great question. The other one about onlookers I will get to in just a minute. So you guys have great questions. They're falling right in line with what I'm talking about, which makes it easy for me.
And then there was another question about whether you had a specific video you would recommend that you had seen to be used with church groups, church youth groups.
No, I haven't, but that is a good question as well. If you look through the stopbullying.gov website and also the cyberbullying one, they have lots of teens, and they're probably about a minute to a minute and a half clips talking about different things that you can do or their experiences with having been targeted or engaged in bullying, and some who've actually come back around and gone back and apologized to the people that they had bullied in the past. So there's lots of different small clips on there. I didn't see anything that would maybe be longer than that. That doesn't mean it isn't there though. So here's some things that you do not want to do and you want to make sure are not happening when you can. So group interventions, so putting a bunch of people together in a room who have been identified as bullying others and trying to teach them how to be nice does not work, because it ends up resulting in something called peer deviancy training, which means they teach each other how to be meaner. So do not do that. There's some really good research, unfortunately, to show that that has even worse outcomes. And conflict resolutions, one thing we didn't get into is there is such thing as conflict. There is such thing as friends just not getting along, and that can be misconstrued as bullying. Bullying is a word that gets thrown around a lot now. When in fact it may be a couple of girls who don't agree on what game they're going to play at recess. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be taken seriously. I want to be clear about that. It's just that it's not bullying. And so helping them and educating them about the differences is important. And if it is truly bullying, or if somebody is reporting a concern for bullying, you do not want to use conflict resolution, because you are putting somebody who has been bullied in the room with somebody who has done the bullying behavior. And you're putting them at greater risk, and the likelihood of them coming to you again or going to any adult, if it's in a school, for example, is going to decrease quite dramatically and quickly. So here's kind of my summary if you're going to think about what you want to do. When you are talking to somebody who has been bullied, you want to listen. You want to be there for them. Only 25 to 50% of those students who've been bullied actually talk to an adult about it. That's not very great numbers. And so being willing and open to hearing what they have to say, it can be really hard not to want to fix it for them. It can be really difficult not to want to just jump in and say, I'm going to go to the school and find the person that did this. I'm calling your teacher. And sometimes that's not what students want, and in fact, maybe why they're not telling anybody. So just being there to listen, taking their concerns seriously, and having that supportive environment for them where they feel safe to share are really critical strategies. And again, remember, people who have been bullied, there's a number of them who may have also engaged in bullying behavior. And so how you listen and what you're doing to support them may also be in the context of them being afraid that they're going to get in trouble for something they have done or their role in it. So being there and listening and then helping to problem solve with them can be a really good strategy. Teaching and modeling resilience. So resilience is this idea that you can recover from adverse situations. This is really important because, again, the data are pretty clear. Lots of people have experienced bullying, and it's been around for a long time. And it's so common, in fact, that we think it's part of normal development, which it should not be part of normal development. That being said, we're all going to run into these adverse situations throughout the course of our lives. So teaching our kids how to prioritize relationships, how to make friends, how to effectively communicate with other people, how to advocate for themselves is part of resilience. Teaching them how to stay physically and mentally well is another important part of resilience. And that might include, when it says part of mind and body, it might include not only physically well as far as how they eat, sleep, exercise, but it also includes helping them to recognize their thoughts, how those may not be helpful in a certain situation, or helping them to limit their exposure to media if it's getting in the way, if it's creating more difficulties for them. It's helping them find a purpose and move toward the goals that they have in spite of what might be happening for them with somebody that's targeting them for bullying. So on some of the videos that I watched, it's really nice because they actually have some students who talk about having been bullied and then finding their passion. And when they find their passion and they get engaged with it, they find a group of people they get along with. And we know that having at least one good friend is a protective factor. Having no good friends or no close relationships is a risk factor. So finding something you love gives you a goal, it gives you purpose and meaning, and it puts you among people who you're more likely to spend time with and want to get along with. And those all also reduce the risks of being targeted for bullying. And teaching each other how to accept change and embrace healthy thoughts. So really helping them to keep perspective. And you do not, again, you don't want to minimize the difficulties, but helping them to see a future beyond what's occurring in this moment. And if you're feeling like it's taking more than you have the skills to do, that's where in Iowa City, there's student family advocates, there's social workers, there's counselors, there's people like me, psychologists in the community. Some situations may require a higher level of support, and that's okay too. You don't have to know everything. And then finally, be an upstander. So that's the opposite of being a bystander. It's being an upstander. So responding quickly and consistently when you see bullying. So that would apply more to the situation or the community, the faculty at a school, for example. What are they doing? What are adults and caregivers doing when they see it happening? Are they sending a message that this will not be tolerated? In the workplace, are there policies? Are people who are in administration in your workplace quickly supporting when they see this happening? It is questioning, you can question the behavior or change the focus. So just simply interrupt. It doesn't even have to be about what's going on. You can just completely change the topic. Hey, did anybody get the new iPhone? I just saw that the new one came out. It throws everybody off. They have no idea what you're talking about, and it might shift the focus just quickly enough to let that other person breathe or get out of the situation. Being present with the person who's being targeted and standing with them, walking with them when they're by themselves. And just checking out with the person. So if you're in that situation and you're just beside yourself, not sure what to say, checking in with the person later, privately. They probably don't want to be called out in front of a bunch of people either because they already feel humiliated.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have one question that was submitted, that bullying takes place online and students can't get away from it. So what advice is there for teachers and parents? And I think this is really a difficult one, and it goes back to making sure we have policies in place that people understand, that students and children understand that it's not acceptable and what it looks like and what it means, and that there are ways to report it. Almost every website has some way to report things that are happening online within their site. And that's part of that manual on cyberbullying that I had posted. You can look in there and it talks a little bit more about that. But it's also being open and willing to listen and hear what they have to say. There's a tendency as adults to jump in and try to fix things, or to be like, well, you shouldn't have been on that website anyway. And that tends to shut kids down, and then they're not going to tell us anyway. So that being open and supportive and willing to listen, so they know they can trust you. And then you can work towards solutions with them. You can help them figure out what their options are and which ones they want to pursue. They're becoming young adults. We can't monitor everything that kids do online. If you've tried, it's impossible. And so we want to start slowly giving them independence and helping them to problem solve some of those things on their own. And the same thing goes for if they tell their friends. The second question here, adolescents won't or don't tell caring adults, but they will tell their friends. Usually because friends are safe. They're not going to run out and tell somebody, and they're more open. They're not going to shut them down by telling them what they shouldn't have done in the situation. And so what we want to do is, again, educate other youth and teach them what it means to be an upstander, and make sure they are confident they have a way to support their friends that isn't going to somehow come back as a retaliation on either them or their friends. Really important pieces. And that is the end of what I have. Again, I'll send some of these resources along to Marcia and Cecilia for you. And I'm open to any other questions you may have at this point.
There's one in the chat. Has there been an increase in the amount of bullying since our political culture has become so polarized?
I have not seen any data on that. I did not look specifically for it. If I had to speculate, I would say yes. But I haven't looked at it. I do think that this is a really important time for everybody to be thinking about bullying and what it means to say things that are harmful and what might be considered harassment, because we're gonna, unfortunately, there has been an increase in that, and I think everybody's been aware.
I knew hate crimes had gone up. And so I figured probably that's being sort of passed on from parents saying things to kids also.
And in the media in general.
True, very true.
Are there any other questions? Well, this has been an excellent presentation. I've learned a lot, and I want to thank Dr. Elizalde so much for agreeing to do this. As she said, she's going to give us these resources, and we will work to get them up on either the St. Andrew website or the YouTube channel along with the lecture. And I thank you all for coming and hope that you have also learned something to be able to.
Thank you. Very informative. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Like I said, I'm new at this, but I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and hope you all have a great day.